I'm Dominic Baker, here hosting the AGR Breaks It Down podcast, and today I have with me our Director of Research, Bill Slusser.
Hey Dom, nice to join you here on this side of the studio. I've had you on that chair outside doing the producing all along. It's really nice to have you inside with me today.
Yeah, generally I'm outside of the studio. I'm monitoring the audio and doing the video and answering questions some of the students have with technical difficulties. So I actually get to be inside directing almost a conversation, teaching.
Hosting.
Yeah, I'm hosting. So that's what we're here to do. We're actually going to talk about the history of our fracture seminars, which I think is quite fascinating because we have a very rich history that all started with Dr. Frank Preston. In fact, we have a wonderful image of him with his wife and some of his his pets. He's got a peregrine falcon that he's got a nice little fun glove on, and a dog. So you got the doctor and the missus up in this picture. And this is the guy that started it all, right?
Yeah, quite the classic photo. And he was a man for all seasons. So that photo definitely captures a lot about his personality back in those days. And a lot of us know more about his older years and what he looked like, more distinguished and doctorial. But that's quite a nice capture of him.
Yeah. Now, we actually have this little booklet that he wrote titled Words of Famous Men and the Work of the Preston Laboratory. So originally, American Glass Research was Preston Laboratories, obviously founded by Dr. Preston himself. And that, eventually turned into American Glass Research due to, I guess, a litigation case, right? Is that how it all happened?
Yeah, Preston started in 1927. He started his own lab. And yeah, that litigation case, Peerless versus Smith in 1931, really got Preston deeply involved with the glass container industry. That one's what drew him in. They needed his help, and that really got things moving in the direction of him being involved.
Yeah. So what exactly happened in that litigation case that was so important? What drew him in?
Okay, so this particular case involved a young woman who had been manning a booth for her father, and there was a soda bottle involved, and it exploded. And unfortunately, she actually lost an eye.
Oh, no.
And so it was a litigation suit against the bottler, the filler, but that in turn went right back to the Peerless Glass Company, who became the prime defendant, and consequently, they are the ones that were on the hook for this case.
Because of the failure of the glass, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It was an issue with the bottle having exploded. The case went through, and it was won by the woman. She was actually rewarded $37,000, which is something like $600,000 in today's terms. So it was not an insignificant amount.
Right.
It essentially bankrupted the Peerless Glass Company. So this was a major issue, and all of the rest of the glass companies instantly took notice. They were very worried that this could be the way things go, because now they knew they were on notice that this kind of lawsuit could really cause them to go down.
Now, at the time, we didn't exactly have standards in place or quality or equipment to really help prevent situations like this. And on top of that, without the science being there of fracture diagnosis and all this quality information, the litigation, I'm assuming the defense probably had no arguments.
Correct. That's actually a lot of the reason that the case was lost, is because they tried to go before the court and explain what their quality procedures were, and they essentially had nothing to speak of. There was nothing that was standardized in the industry at that time. They didn't know anything about fracture diagnosis. And to be honest with you, it turns out that there was an expert that testified on behalf of the woman and her side that took the word striation, and we know it today as a surface marking. If you've come to any of our seminars, you'll know it's a surface marking. But he misconstrued that word as stria, meaning cord. And so he claimed that it was a cord stress that caused the failure of the bottle. It was completely untrue, but nobody knew better. And the defense couldn't say anything because they hadn't even learned about fracture
differences.
Yeah,
absolutely. So that's what drew Preston in. right? Was this,
Yeah. So
we just didn't have info.
the glass companies, there was a GCA at the time, right? That you want to go ahead and talk
Yeah,
about that?
let's talk about the GCA. Absolutely. That's the Glass Container Association,
Yeah.
right? So that was kind of like the early association that was formed, right?
Correct.
In response to this.
No, they had previously existed.
existed.
They
Okay.
existed.
Yeah.
But in response to this lawsuit and the loss that it involved, they realized that they had to, as a industry, come together and figure some things out, which caused them to approach Dr. Preston. He had done research, they knew of him, but they needed to better understand the things we talked about, quality testing, fracture diagnosis, so they enlisted him to do that.
Right. So we had Dr. Preston kind of working in conjunction with the GCA, and they came up with a standards testing kind of committee, right?
Correct. They had formed a committee, and sometimes the member committee did their own research. Sometimes they asked Preston to do some of the research. Many times they were just canvassing the industry, asking what type of test to use, is it standardized? And they were just realizing, Preston actually made the comment that this whole situation's in chaos. We need to actually standardize. We need to come to create some testing that is standard across the industry.
So then they got together, they created these standard tests, and I'm assuming once you have those tests, you need to educate people on those tests.
Correct.
Yeah.
Once the test had been established and the committee had all agreed, then they needed understanding of the test so they could utilize it properly. They also were quite interested in becoming expert in the areas of defending themselves. They needed to know how to speak if there was another case intelligently about why the bottle broke. So not only did they know the test, but they needed to know the mechanical functions of the glass.
Glass properties. Yeah,
Correct.
that makes perfect sense. In fact, I have a couple other images here. Let's open up this booklet. We have quite a few names here, but I want to focus on one in particular. I'm going to go ahead and highlight this guy right here, Dr. Gehring.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Gehring, from my understanding, was hired on by Preston, kind of under his tutelage, and he was the one that, as we kind of transition away from litigation cases in the GCA, created the fracture seminars here at AGR.
Correct.
Right?
He actually, not only was he hired by Dr. Preston, the GCA pretty much asked him to be the hire. He was kind of
He was recommended.
recommended by them. So he was a liaison in a way to them.
Okay.
But Preston was happy to have him to actually do the work under his tutelage, as you mentioned. So yeah, he put together the seminars and he taught them as well.
Yeah, so we're going to take a quick look at my notes here. So we had the GCA in 1936, right? They create the Standard Testing Procedures Committee.
Right.
And then they approved the hiring of Dr. Gehring. He was assigned to Preston Labs. And that was in what year? Was that 1938?
I think that's correct.
Roughly?
Yes.
Yeah, 1938. So they had a conference. And in, I believe it was 1939, about that time frame, Dr. Gehring had kind of completed the first ever fracture seminar, right?
Yes. So they had the first seminar. There was only 5 attendees. All of these were quite high-level executive types in each of the 5 different companies. So the member companies were sending pretty high-level folks with the idea that they would learn from Dr. Preston, Dr. Gehring, and then take that back to disseminate it through their company.
So they would trickle down from the top,
Correct.
and then everybody would learn kind of from their leadership
Exactly
how to manage these standards and testing procedures.
Yeah, that was how it started off. So just those 5. And the first seminar was 5 days. So I think Dr. Gehring spent part of the day talking about the mechanical properties of glass and how it functions. And part of the day was spent actually testing and demonstrating and having people run through those tests and understand them firsthand.
Now, a lot of our customers and people might know us in the industry, we develop equipment, right? So we were still developing equipment way back when as well. Was a lot of that equipment that we were using in these seminars that AGR equipment, or was this other standard testing equipment from other industry?
That's the interesting thing. Many of the pieces of test equipment that they found in the industry that were not standardized, they didn't make the cut. Eventually, Preston developed the test to the point where he made the prototypes. And so those prototypes, because they were agreed by on all the committee members, Nobody was making them. Only Preston had ever made them. So the question became, would you be able to supply us with this equipment? So AGR starts to get into the equipment business right there.
Right then and there. So not only do we have a hand in the testing procedures, but we had a hand in the equipment itself that standardized.
In many cases, yes. Yes.
Wow. So that's kind of an origin for a lot. That's pretty cool. Now, I know that, so all these standards that came out of this, I know Preston was approached by people like ASTM and whatnot. Now, he didn't do any work for them.
Not directly, usually.
Not directly. But from my understanding, a lot of the ASTM standards that concern glass containers or the ISO or CD standards draw a lot from the origins of the work of Preston and Dr. Gehring and in the GCA in general.
Exactly. Like many of the most common and oldest procedures, the ASTM procedures that we know for internal pressure, for annealing measurements, pressure testing, I already said that one, impact testing, things like that, they all came directly out of the work that Preston did. So eventually they became the standard test in the industry, and whether or not Preston was working directly for ASTM, those procedures were what were submitted and eventually accepted.
Yeah, and we still practice those today.
Yeah, and they still are in vogue today.
Right, well, that's awesome. Well, I do kind of want to go through a couple more images here from this book. We have some old testing equipment here. I do believe right behind you, Bill, we have an old density comparator.
Oh, yeah.
Which that
doesn't look surprisingly much different from the one that we're using in our lab today.
Yeah, the science hasn't changed.
Yeah, very, very similar. Nothing.
Neither has the equipment.
Nothing too rocket sciencey about that piece of equipment.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one thing that I like on this page is this museum of bottles. And so one of the things that's in the history that we know, when the first seminars were being put together, they had to assemble the room, and they got this 400 example bottles that they had in there that they could refer to. And so that actually captured in photographic form is really great. Now today here in Butler, we have a much more subtle version of that. We've
more minimalistic.
We've gone much more minimalistic and try to make sure that the bottles are critical to our discussion and a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. But yeah, same kind of idea even today.
So they would take these bottles basically just off the shelf, and they would kind of exhibit a particular load or breakage example, maybe a flaw.
I think it was some of that, but I do believe a lot of it was just different examples of glass bottles. Just different designs, shapes, colors, everything.
Everything. So whatever example they could conceivably imagine,
exactly,
that they could discuss, they had
it right there.
They had it right there.
In the museum.
In the museum. And that museum was here in Butler, right? We're located.
Correct. Well, this particular picture would have been at Preston Labs, which is about 3 miles from where we're currently sitting.
Actually, we have an image of that. We have images of some of the buildings here.
Correct.
A lot of these are kind of low level, what you would expect out of the 1940s, 1950s era. One floor, maybe 2 stories, very kind of just flat. Basic buildings.
The actual original lab right there. This is all Preston's property. I mean, he owns all of this, and he's setting up his laboratory here. He moved from downtown Butler to this location. I think it's more than 25 acres of land that he's working on. And he builds the laboratory. Amazingly enough, in his later years, there is an upstairs there. It's just a very small section. That was where he lived with his wife. They actually resided there.
I don't think I knew that. And he actually had, he was holding a peregrine falcon. I mean, the man was really into nature. We have him here, I believe. There's an old jack feeding a peacock. I mean, the Preston Park, there's a park dedicated to him.
This same land became a park because once his wife passed, it was given to the township of Butler. It's now called Preston Park. And there's all kinds of great nature and trails, different parts of grasses that are grown, different pine trees from around the country, all in their arboretum. Very interesting place to visit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of closes out this book. I'll kind of leave it up here for now. This just goes on to the rest. There's some mentions of some other important figures in here, but I'll leave it up here so we can see Preston with his peregrine falcon. I think it's just so cool that he did that. But I do want to kind of talk about the kind of evolution that took place with some of the fracture seminars. So you mentioned it started with those executive levels.
Correct.
And it was supposed to kind of trickle down. That was a week-long
Right.
seminar. And we did a lot of standardized testing. We got hands-on experience with the machines, the museum of bottles that we saw.
Right.
Went through all of that. How did that change over the course of the years? Because it's different today.
Well, it went from about 1940 till about 1960 under that format. So that's a pretty long stretch of 20 years where they're doing it that way. Around 1960, they decided to start expanding it, and they got it as much as a 4-week course.
4 weeks.
Yeah, so they were asking people to come for 4 weeks. Not surprising, even back then, that was a big ask.
Mm-hmm.
And it only lasted for about a year or two.
Was that 4 consecutive weeks?
Yes.
Wow.
And even from our historical perspective, asking around, we're not quite sure whether people were staying throughout that period, because some of these people would have been traveling pretty good distances, and it's not like you could.
It was still here in Butler.
Yeah, still here in Butler.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they would go home for weekends or whether they would stay through weekends, it probably depended on the individual, the company, what willingness they had to pay for that travel, things like that.
Right.
So quite a big ask. Now, that didn't last very long, probably for many of the reasons.
I'm assuming those aren't the executives staying 4 weeks.
We've moved down to some degree, probably getting more down into maybe quality control manager types, things of that nature is probably what they were looking for there. Still someone that they would get very deeply trained, but then still could train the people that reported directly to them, but not the high executive.
So quality managers were kind of the focus group of what we were targeting with those
Yeah,
seminars.
that's the belief. Yes.
But that didn't last very long, right?
No,
That was
less than 2 years, and
2 years.
that was already realized
not sustainable.
too long. So then it moved down to the closer to the 2-week range, and that went on for several years as well. But by the 1970s, we were looking at 1 to 1.5 weeks of schools, which is getting really close to where we get to today.
To the modern day fracture seminar length.
Right. And then during that time, I believe as the time constraints were lessened, we were also changing the people that were attending. So you're getting people that might have been under those quality control managers even.
Okay, so we're still maintaining the fundamental concepts of standard testing, fracture diagnosis, but we're shifting maybe a little bit more focused on what exactly
for what the needs of those individuals
the needs
would
of
be,
the individuals, right?
You know, you don't necessarily need to know the overarching issues as much as I need to know why this bottle broke. I need to know how to run this test. Things of that nature became more important.
Right. And so we actually had, just the one fracture seminar, and eventually we developed an advanced fracture seminar.
Right.
In response to kind of condensing everything down.
Right.
We expanded the number of courses we had to get more in depth. And this actually brings us to kind of a fun, interesting story with one of our coworkers, Peter DeHaan.
Yep. So, the story goes something like this. Peter was working in the Netherlands for a glass company at the time. He attended our Fracture 1, and I think by his own admission, some light bulbs went on. He was intrigued by what we were teaching, what principles we had, the knowledge we actually had about how and why the glass broke, and really caught his fancy. And so a year or so later, these were actually seminars given over in Munich, Germany, by the way, and we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. But a couple years later, he shows up to Fracture 2 and just loving it. I mean, there we've got microscopes involved. We're going deeper into the understanding of why glass does what it does and the fracture dynamics and more complex failures. He's just eating it up, loves it so much. And I'll never forget, because he actually filled out the form that we always ask our students to do at the end, a questionnaire. And the last line he wrote was, "Time for Fracture 3, gentlemen." And of course, Fracture 3 didn't exist. And we kind of thought,
We just have the two, the basic and advanced.
Yep, exactly. Fracture 1, Fracture 2, basic and advanced. Didn't exist. And we kind of looked at that quizzically. And I know Gary, who was with me doing the teaching at the time, he saw that as a decent opportunity, but didn't have a chance to act on it. Well, the story continues that eventually Peter DeHaan becomes our colleague. We hired him. And so one of the first things that happened when he got here to Butler was he talked to Gary, and before you know it, they were putting together and creating fracture 3, which now does in fact exist.
Does in fact exist. And we still run it today, right?
We do.
We still
we
run
do.
it today.
Mhm.
And that, so explain to me the differences between like the basic, the advanced, and the, I guess, what would you call fracture 3? Like a expert or a
Yeah, we call it
certified
master class. Right. So in the fracture 1, you're going to understand the loads. You're going to understand why glass breaks, the very simple fundamentals. We'll talk a little bit about how the stresses are created in the glass, but we're not going to get deeply into that. We're just going to make sure you understand how the testing is done, why glass breaks the way it does, and how to do some very simple diagnosis. We're not going to have microscopes there. You're just going to have hand magnifiers, a lot of photographs, hands-on samples for sure. When you get to the advanced, we're going to take it up several notches. We're going to get a little more into the theory behind fracture dynamics. We're going to talk a little bit more about flaws that we don't normally see. We're going to look at complex fractures, two-stage breaks, using the microscopes. It's going to get a little more in depth. When you get to fracture 3, that ups the ante a good bit more. We're going to talk a lot more about some of the high-level technical issues on fracture dynamics that we didn't get to in fracture 2. We're still going to use the microscopes. There's going to be a ton of actual breakage samples that are of the level that if you're going to be a master in our class, you're going to have to be able to diagnose multiple different issues within the same breakage group. So we go through a lot of hands-on that way, but we definitely take it up a little bit further into the theoretical, if you will.
And we actually offered certificates, right?
Right. There's certificates for that, for sure.
To kind of qualify you as a fracture
diagnostician. Yeah, you're considered a qualified fracture diagnostician. Yes,
and you would have all the know-how to basically take a pilot, call it, and say, I know what caused this, or how to.
By rights, yes, you definitely should. If you've gone to all 3 of them and you've done it all, and you've actually taken all that information in, you are fully able to handle that.
Awesome.
No doubt.
So you mentioned so all of these courses were originally in Butler. Right. We started in Butler. All the fracture seminars that were developed by Dr. Gehring and Preston were rooted in Butler. So
Correct.
People had to travel to us. Now you mentioned Peter was it Munich?
It was the Munich
Germany.
school.
So we expanded our locations. We started traveling to different locations.
Correct. Now we can have a customer come to us and ask for private training, so we can go anywhere if you really want us. But we were trying to get to some key locations so that people could come to what we call our open enrollment, which means individuals could sign up and come. So you might have 20 different companies there. You might have 10 different companies, depending on the mix. And so, yeah, one of the early ones that I know that was done with Russ Southwick, one of our Dr. Preston's original basically co-workers, was in Munich. And that's been there for a long time. I think that's probably been there for between 40 and 50 years.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, we ran a fracture seminar commercial, which I'm going to play here for you guys so you can kind of see. It does mention, I'll go ahead and start it now. It does mention all of the locations that we frequent as AGR, as we teach Fracture 1. So we have a couple of European locations. We have a new location that we are just starting in the U.S. now on the west side.
Right. I just came back from doing a school out in California. We partnered with customer Trinchero to be able to host an open enrollment. So we're happy to get that one to now get at least the western half of the United States a chance to join in.
Yeah. And so we're just showing some examples here of samples, get hands-on, like Bill was saying. Here are some of the locations.
Now, Delft is where Peter is, so we've been able to do schools there because that's where we have a second lab now. Of course, Butler continues. Munich, we've already talked about. We've been doing schools in Italy, down in Montecchio Emilio, for somewhere around 10 to 12 years now. Did that Trinchero that I mentioned, and we've been in Krakow for about 15 years. So those are our most common locations that we've been returning to each year and building up a nice following.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to find out any more information, you can visit our website. Our marketing guy, Tim, loves to update that all the time, so always up to date. Feel free to, reach out to us and ask, if you have any questions. And with that, let's, just do some final closing comments. So, Bill, if I was out in the industry right now and I was maybe having some trouble on my line, would you recommend that I come to Fracture One just willy-nilly, just for everybody, or do you have a specific kind of audience in mind when it
Well,
comes to fracture?
I think a lot of people can benefit from Fracture One. If they're in the glass manufacturing side of things, I would say the majority of the people that are doing anything with testing or manufacturing the glass, they can definitely benefit. So if you're on the machine, you're in the hot end, you're in the cold end, you're in the quality control, you guys are all going to benefit. If you're in the filling industry, if you're having to do anything with understanding how the bottle breaks or how the bottle works its way through your filling operation, you're certainly going to benefit, because from that, you're going to learn how glass performs, what you can expect of it, what its expected strength should be. You'll learn how to do some simple fracture diagnosis, so you'll have an idea. And consequently, I mean, if you need to work with us on a problem, you're going to be fully aware of what we're talking about. You'll have that vocabulary. So it's going to make it a lot.
Fundamental knowledge and language to be able to.
Exactly. So you'll be able to, the information we give you is going to be meaningful, right? It's not just going to be technical gobbledygook, right? So
absolutely,
that helps. So
and it would also help you maybe understand. Okay, so if this is the problem, and I understand the problem now, I can now understand how to optimize my line,
correct,
in a way to avoid those issues cropping up.
Right. So that level of employee in the glass industry, certainly they're going to get huge benefits, and I definitely would recommend Fracture One's most popular seminar we've got. It gives you a nice broad overview of what's going to happen. So that's a nice entry into it.
So quite a broad audience. Anyone from the corporate office almost, as long as they're dealing with kind of quality control or the manufacturing side of things, line optimization, so on and so forth, down to the people who run the machines.
Absolutely.
Would benefit as well. So that's awesome. If you guys want to check us out, obviously you can follow us on LinkedIn. We post a lot of great stuff there. We do images, we do videos. I think, these podcasts are going to be on there as well. So if you enjoyed this content, let us know. Go ahead and comment. Tell us what you want to hear, what you want to see. We're looking for new ideas, and we have some exciting stuff coming with that, as well as check out our websites. We have both a website that deals with all of our services, as well as online seminars now. So we've approached that field since the pandemic. We had to expand into the digital realm. Yeah,
hence this studio we're sitting in that we had to build.
Exactly. It's actually where we teach our courses online, is this very room. We'll throw up slides. We'll talk to, we've done fracture, we've done design, we've done coatings, cord and annealing.
Lightweighting.
All of that.
Covered many of the topics that we do in our regular seminars. Obviously in a little more bite-sized form, because nobody wants to sit at a computer for 8 hours straight.
Yes.
But certainly a lot of great information is there and available.
Yeah. Now you would lack the hands-on experience that we have.
That's what you're missing.
Seminars, obviously.
That's what you're missing a lot of.
Or the one-to-one contact with one of our lecturers, although you can still contact us, email us if you're having issues with any of the courses or just understanding them. We're more than happy to help. But the benefit is more your time, your availability, getting that information to you. They're a little bit cheaper as well than our in-person.
You don't have to travel. It's a shorter period of time, more condensed information.
Yep, absolutely. So really just we're trying to reach out to as many people and fill the needs for customers. So with that, I'm about wrapped up, Bill. It was very nice having you on.
Thank you, Don. It's great to be on this side of the mic from you, and definitely would like to do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be looking forward to it in the future. So once again, thank you for joining us on AGR Breaks It Down. This is Dominic Baker and
Bill Slusser, signing off.
See you later.